Hi, it's Kimberley Leonard on this Sky News Daily. We're going to talk about Ukraine on this episode. President Zelensky has been at the NATO summit after saying he wasn't happy about the timeline for Ukrainian membership. And our correspondent John Sparks is in Dnipro. He's been meeting an Irish guy who went to Ukraine to fight. He's called Rhys, also known as Rambo. He's been there for 17 months, and along with others, John has been hearing first-hand accounts of the Ukrainian offensive, why foreign volunteers went there and why some are leaving. It's really fascinating. We don't really get a lot of information about what it's like on the front line, and John's account of what he's been hearing from these people is absolutely harrowing. Our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katy Spencer, on the Daily first, because she's been reporting for Sky today on those new claims against the BBC presenter about his conduct online and on apps. Two more made it into the Sun this morning. One included an allegation the presenter broke lockdown rules to meet someone in their 20s. So, Katy, more pressure on this presenter now to name himself publicly.
Here we are outside of the BBC. Everyone that goes past us, it is something that they are talking about. There's no getting away from the fact, really, if you like, that the presenter's reputation and the BBC's reputation is completely intertwined. And as the days go by, it's becoming increasingly damaging for the corporation, but also for the stars that are in the same bracket, if you like, the paid bracket, the six-figure earners, which is all we know about this mystery presenter. Jeremy Vine, though, in the last 24 hours, who, of course, is a Radio 2 presenter, he put out a tweet saying that he now feels it has built to such a stage that the presenter in question needs to basically put his hands up and say, this is me that I'm talking about, rather than bring any more damaging publicity on the BBC. And not only did Jeremy Vine put that out as a tweet, also on his Channel 5 show, he started that by going into some detail about how it's been for him, really, and his not only the pressures on him, but the pressures on people that he's working with. Also saying that the unnamed presenter, he knows people that have spoken to him, and that understandably, perhaps this presenter is very angry about the Sun's story. Apparently, the presenter feels like it has been a digging expedition on the part of the Sun, who he feels have been effectively trying to get more dirt on him. But that doesn't escape from the fact, as Jeremy Vine put it on his show, it would seem impossible that this presenter, regardless of what they did or didn't do, will be able to, in a week's time, take their pass, go in through that front door and resume work as they did before. So really the pressure is building on this person, either to identify themselves or certainly I think it doesn't look likely that this is going to go away any time soon.
Katy, and there are others who used to work at the BBC who disagree and think that he shouldn't be named and shouldn't have to name himself.
Well, this is true as well. Certainly Richard Bacon, former Blue Peter presenter and former radio presenter here at the BBC, he's basically replied to Jeremy Vine's tweet saying, come on, Jeremy, words to the effect, I should say, you're a big boy, you can handle 5 minutes worth of the stick that you're getting on social media. Clearly, he believes that this presenter must be going through something very complex and struggling to wrap his head around the level of attention that he must be getting. So there are those voices, certainly the likes of Richard Bacon, who are saying maybe we all just need to be a bit understanding that this person in question must be going through a hell of a week as their world crumbles around them.
Is there a mood, Katy, or is there a change in mood from the public? And a sense that now this doesn't actually need that much public attention anymore?
I mean, that's a hard one to call, isn't it? What's changed in the last 24 hours is this fact that one of these allegations has now been linked to behaviour within the pandemic itself. You have to remember that the BBC was leading the way. They were the ones that were explaining to the nation the rules of how we should have been behaving. So there is that element now, I feel, of hypocrisy that perhaps you can be the ones that are calling out the likes of Dominic Cummings and be incredibly critical of how other people are behaving, while this presenter in question was allegedly visiting young people and breaking the rules himself. It's getting more and more complex, though, because we know certainly it would seem the Sun seemed to be reining in on that element of the criminality to those initial claims. We know the young person in question, the sexually explicit photos, the initial claims that were made. The young person has denied that there was anything inappropriate or untoward that went on there. The Sun, though, have hit back at critics who have said that they haven't sort of published enough detail in that initial story, by saying they were right to publish that story because it was less about the criminality, more about two very concerned parents for their child's welfare. There are a lot of different arguments in this one.
Okay, Katy, where do you think this story is going to go?
If this person was honest and open and just explained where they're coming from, their side of the story, I think that would take the heat out of this story. But I think until that happens, he's not going to be able to return here to the BBC, walk in that front door and start work again. So I don't know how he thinks this ends, but it's not going to end this way by him saying nothing.
Okay, Katy, thanks a lot. Right, on to the NATO summit in Lithuania. Not all plain sailing there today for President Joe Biden.
While Ukraine continues to make progress on necessary reforms. But we're not waiting for that process to be finished to make the long-term commitments that we're making to Ukraine's security. Vladimir and I shouldn't be so familiar. Mr. Zelensky and I talked about the kind of guarantees we could make in the meantime, when I was in Ukraine and when we met in other places.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has been there after tweeting his frustration about the timeline for getting membership of the organisation. Sky News asked the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace about that and got a pretty blunt reply, saying the UK is not an Amazon delivery service for weapons to Ukraine. Our correspondent, John Sparks, is in Dnipro in Ukraine. John, let's start quickly with President Zelensky's frustrations about the road to NATO membership.
I mean, the Ukrainians want to be fully fledged members, and they want more than that. They want a roadmap. They want a timeline. They want to know how and when this is actually going to happen. And, you know, their point of view is, hey, look, you know, we're already part of the European security infrastructure here. You know, we are fighting the Russians, a threat to Ukrainian and European security. We're already doing the job in a way. So when are you going to make us members of NATO? Zelensky was sounding pretty irritated, pretty annoyed. Via a tweet, he said it was absurd that there was no clarity yet on when Ukraine would become a member of NATO. He said, look, we understand why we can't join right now. It's understandable to me. I get it. It's logical, he said, that we can't have a world war. I get it. And what he got in return from that was a commitment from NATO, and it was published in a joint communiqué. The communiqué said, we're inviting Ukraine to become members when allies agree, when the conditions are met. We're going to make it easier for Ukraine. So NATO say, hey, look, we're going to make it easier for you, but at the moment, we're not going to take you on. Warmer words from Zelensky, but I think the irritation, the annoyance is real, and I think he's reflecting the views of people here in the country, particularly soldiers on the front line who say, yeah, we're defending Ukraine, but we're also defending Poland and the Baltic states and Romania. We're doing your job for you. So come on, recognize that, make us members of NATO.
Let's talk about the war, John, because you're on assignment at the moment. You're in Ukraine, you're in Dnipro, and you've been talking to this guy who's Irish, and he's gone over there to fight. How did you get in touch with him in the first place?
Well, this is my 6th trip to Ukraine since the conflict began, and I'm with a team who have made multiple trips to Ukraine as well, and we build contacts on these stories. And our meeting with two foreign fighters, we had one, the Irishman, Rhys Byrne, codename Rambo. He said he'd spent 17 months in Ukraine. He spent a lot of time speaking about one particular incident about 3 weeks ago, where he said he almost got killed, and it clearly had shaken him up. It was one of those moments where you begin an interview, you're not really sure what you're going to get, and what we got was this account from the front line that you don't hear very often. It was raw, it was highly descriptive, and he painted a picture of brutality on the front, of the loss of life, of mass casualties.
It's horror. It's horror. There is just, it's a genocide. It's slaughter. There is just people dead everywhere. Russians dead, Ukrainian people dead, Ukrainian soldiers dead, just left there. Just left there, and I don't know why.
And I think that we know that. We know that that is the situation on the front, but it was a very personal account, and I think that, that made it different.
So what's their background? Are these fighters who've gone there from different countries, what's their background? Do they have experience in war?
The answer is yes and no. I think they come from a wide variety of backgrounds. I don't think that Byrne had a formal military background. I know from speaking to other foreign fighters, I spoke to a young Briton yesterday who had done a lengthy spell in the British Army. And I think that's one of the interesting things about this story, that there is room in Ukraine, in various units. They will select from a wide and diverse group of people, and you don't necessarily have to have formal military training, and you would certainly pick it up as you go along if you survive.
What was it like meeting him in person, and what are your lasting impressions of him?
He was fit. He moved constantly. He was never still. He was constantly in motion. I thought very, very articulate. I remember him telling me that he couldn't really sleep. He would get an hour, maybe 2 hours of sleep a night. Agitated, constantly agitated, short temper, and we saw that at the station, him losing his temper when it turned out that they had bought the wrong tickets. I think this has been a profoundly difficult and disturbing experience for him, and I think he's come from a difficult background, which he explained to us, but I think it's been a difficult experience, a damaging experience. I think the process of adjustment that he's going to need to go through is going to be lengthy and really challenging for him, and I really hope that he can negotiate that, and I really hope that there are people around to help him with that.
Part of this assignment, you went to this house, this sanctuary, where the foreign volunteers, I don't know, are they based or they go from there? But what was that like when you walked in there? Who was in there? What was it like?
Well, it's run by a guy called Owen Panoma. He's a pastor, a New Zealander, a really interesting guy with his own very interesting personal story. He had problems with the law earlier in his life, found the church, found a way to, in his words, to do good in the world. And he's been in Ukraine for a long time. He's acted as a chaplain to several brigades. He's worked for Christian organizations delivering aid to communities near the front. And this is one of the things that he does. He has a home in eastern Ukraine where foreign fighters and also NGO workers, volunteers, they need a break from the intensity of the war, from the intensity of life near the front, then they can come and they can spend a day, an evening, a couple of days in his flat, and he'll cook for them, he'll provide them with a bed, he'll talk to them if they want to talk, but they don't have to. And it's a really interesting setup, and he's busy. He says he's had from anywhere from 2 to 3 to 8 people in there a night. He does his best. He's there to listen. He's there to talk. He's there to cook. You know, he's not asking for anything from them, and
So-
they don't have to pay. And they clearly need, you know, some form of companionship. One of the interesting things he said was that, you know, the trauma, you know, makes itself known. Often in the middle of the night, you know, he'll hear these guys, they're sleeping on his living room floor or in the other bedroom, and he'll hear them screaming.
They sleep talk. They scream. Night time, you come out, go to the toilet, think, oh, he's all right, and the guys wake up. You know, they don't realise that what they're doing. They may not be aware of what they're actually doing because it's quiet here. Out there, it's not.
You know, there are real issues there, and he can see that. And I think one of his concerns is that eventually, you know, many of these guys will end up going home.
And you actually have seen, is it body cam footage of some of the fighting? There's one instance where they hit a mine, I think, in a truck, and then another when they're fired on by a tank. Can you just explain what that body cam footage is like and how you got it? I assume it was from this character, Rambo.
Yeah, this guy Rambo or Rhys Byrne, he had a camera on him, some GoPro style camera, and had been filming during this engagement. And what he said was that his unit was brought to a staging post close to the line. They call it the zero line here, and that the idea was that they would go forward and they would attack the line and try and take a Russian trench line, and then hold it until auxiliary units came up and reinforced their position. The Ukrainians were supplied with advanced weaponry, the Leopard tanks, the Challenger 2 tanks, armored personnel carriers, but they're useless in the minefields. And we've already seen that through other footage that has been released on social media of damaged vehicles stranded in these big minefields. The Ukrainians have been adapting their tactics, and one of the things that they have done is that they've been sending relatively small units on foot towards the Russian trench lines to basically take those trenches on foot. In his footage, we see that there were a couple of Ukrainian tanks with them at the time, and then those tanks withdrew. They left, and they saw another tank in the distance. They believed that that tank was a friendly, a Ukrainian tank, and we can see in the footage that they're all pretty relaxed. And then Byrne or Rambo, he's fixing he carries a heavy machine gun, and he's sort of manipulating the bullets, getting ready for the mission, basically. And then all of a sudden, a shell crashes in from this tank. It's not a Ukrainian tank, it's a Russian tank. Clearly, there's a great deal of shock there. Some of them pile into the bushes, looking for cover, into the trees, and there is more footage of them scrambling around in this small woods. One of the commanders in the unit is desperately trying to reach his superiors and trying to find assistance. And then eventually, after some hours, a Ukrainian Humvee, a pickup truck, pulls up in their area, and they scramble in the back. And one of the things that Byrne said was that no one was actually looking for them. And that was one of the things that Byrne said he was annoyed about, the fact that there was no rescue mission. It was just a pickup truck that had come along looking for a pistol and a satellite receiver. So they scrambled into the back of this truck using understandably emotive language. They told the driver to get out of there, but they'd been spotted by a Russian tank, T-72. They saw that it was driving after them. They told the driver to get a move on, and they got out of there as quickly as they could. Go! Let's go! Byrne and his colleagues said that it fired a shell over their heads, and it was clearly a very frightening experience. And I think that the pictures that Byrne provided show that, they reveal that.
You said that he was upset that they weren't looking for him. And there's another point when he's talking to you and he says there were bodies everywhere. There were Russian bodies, there were Ukrainian bodies. Did you get a sense that he didn't really know what he was in for when he went to Ukraine?
Kimberley, it's a good question. It is something that I asked him. I said, look, surely you knew what you're getting yourself into. And he said that he did. But he felt that, he was justified in doing it. He said that I'm here to save Ukrainian children, Ukrainian women. I have a duty to do this. I feel other people should be doing the same thing as me. But I think you can see from the emotional state that he was in that it takes a toll, doesn't it?
And you accompanied Rhys, didn't you, in a group of these soldiers as they were going to get a train to, at the end of it, hopefully go home. First of all, what did they want? Why did they want to give up? Was it that incident that you were talking about earlier? What made them think, okay, enough is enough, we're going to leave now? And did they have sympathy for the Ukrainians who couldn't, for the Ukrainian fighters who simply couldn't get on a train and go home?
Yeah, they did have sympathy for the people who couldn't go home. But I think they also felt like they had done what they could do. They had done enough. I think that's how they saw that. I mean, one thing Rhys said was, I'm hoping to put this behind me. But I don't think I'll be able to because my colleagues, my fellow combatants, they'll be sending me videos from the front, and then I'll be back. I'll be right in it again, and I'll be thinking about them. I'll be thinking about the war. I'll be worrying about them. I think in terms of why they left, I mean, what Byrne said was that this incident where he almost lost his life a couple of weeks ago, that was the final straw for him. I don't think that he always thought his commanders were very good. He had complaints about pay. He said he went frequently unpaid. These guys are supposed to get a salary. It's not very high, but they are supposed to get paid. Byrne said he hadn't been paid for a long, long time, and he did describe himself to us as a broken man. So I think there was a realization there about the damage that it has done and what he's going to have to do when he does get home. I think there were multiple reasons, an accumulative effect of his experiences, and I think he just had enough.
Well, it's pretty evident that this war has such an impact on the people who go there to fight these foreign fighters. Do you think that they have an impact on the war?
Difficult to measure the impact made by foreign fighters. We don't actually know how many there are of them. This was something that I asked the New Zealand pastor. I said, what, we're talking about hundreds here? Thousands? He said definitely thousands. And in a way you can understand it. A lot of them would be trained soldiers from Britain and elsewhere in countries where they haven't ultimately done what they have trained to do. They've trained to be soldiers and they haven't had the opportunity to actually do soldiering. And in Ukraine, you can come over here, very quickly find yourself on the front line, fighting, doing what you have trained to do. It's going to attract experienced soldiers, but it's also going to attract fair share of adventurers and thrill seekers, those sort of people. It's a dangerous decision. So I think that initial burst of enthusiasm that we had from people in Western countries and elsewhere to sign up, I think that's probably over. That's finished, and I think there are indications that they're losing people now, either people who are giving up, who have had enough, or people who are getting killed or injured.
This episode of The Daily was produced by Emma Ray Woodhouse and Soila Aparicio. The editor was Paul Stanworth.